don't know who I am, but I know all about you. I've come to talk to you tonight about the things I've seen you do. I've come to set the record straight. I've come to shine the light on you. Let me introduce myself. I am the cold hard truth.
Cayman's restaurants have always been there for you. A place to get together with friends, to celebrate, to take a first date, or grab a meal between rugby and piano practice. And even though the tables are empty, some kitchens are still full, ready to feed you and your family while keeping you safe and making your meals as delicious as ever. They were there for you, now we can be there for them. While doors might be closed, kitchens are open for delivery. Let's eat.
All right, folks, good evening. Sorry for the slightly delayed start there. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We are ready to rock and roll. So a lot of stuff is going on. I've been receiving your questions, which we're going to dig into here shortly and get answered. And there's quite a bit that has been going on. Okay, sorry. I'm trying to just respond to a message real quick. So breaking regional news. The good news is locally we have nothing new to report in terms of cases. Someone said to me today, the press conferences tend to go on for quite some time. And they were kind of wondering why it is sometimes that despite there being nothing new that happened between yesterday and today, there's still a lot of discussion during the press conference. They still take almost the same amount of time. I don't know why that is, folks. I don't actually run the prep briefings, so I can't speak to that. But what I do know is that there were no new test results available, which is very different than saying we have a batch of test results that came back negative. So I want to make sure that that is very, very clear. They are ramping up testing on the local front, and that's good news because we will see as a result of that, I think that a lot of, we'll get a fair idea of exactly where we're at in this country with COVID-19. The more people that are tested, the better. And so they're starting with frontline staff, and there'll be quite a number of those individuals. The idea is to try to test everyone on this island if possible. Now, I want to talk about a few things straight up in terms of misinformation that's circulating around, as well as just downright ignorance. Like I hear people saying, well, I don't want to get tested. I'm not going to get tested. And, they can't force me to get tested. I mean, it's just unbelievable. We see in the US, for example, that there are people who, who are now protesting that the government has shut down businesses in order to try to save their lives. They would much rather, I guess, be dead and making money right up until the point that they die than anything else. And the last time I checked, you cannot take money with you. That's a definite no. And, it's just shocking that people don't understand the big picture here and certainly don't understand what governments around the world are tasked with and what they're trying to do. There is no way that, one's life should be competing with commerce. Like that just doesn't make any sense at all. And so when people are saying those things and we see those stories in circulation, they're actually protesting. They're protesting frontline workers. They are protesting, with guns, and they're in close proximity with each other. It's just an added recipe for disaster. How does that impact us? Why do we even care? Well, we have to care because, as I keep saying, now more than ever, this world is interconnected in the most intimate way ever. So everything that is happening in terms of the economy around the world is going to impact every single one of us. So even if Cayman itself is able to reopen, we will not be in a position to reopen our borders for a very long time. And not being in a position to reopen our borders will mean that, there will be businesses overseas that are tied into local industries and local businesses here that are simply not going to survive. I mean, I have got people saying in about 3 months, there will be a massive number of businesses locally that will have to shut down. And that is what it is. And it's unfortunate. But I think that, it's the reality that we're living with. And when other countries like the Americans, whether it's Americans, Jamaicans, whomever, can't get their act together and can't get this virus under containment, that means that all of us will be suffering a little bit longer than we probably really want to. So let me bring you updated with some numbers. I was reading earlier today that Europe now has 1 million infections. So, worldwide, we are looking at, let me see how many million now that we're at. So there's several different sources that we pull information from. So worldwide, we are looking at 2.5 million persons who now have this. Of that, we have 176,000, almost 177,000 that are dead. The US by far has outpaced Europe, Spain, Italy, France, Germany, the UK. Sorry. But the Europeans as a whole do account for 1 million of the 2.5 million cases. And then the rest of it is spread out around the rest of the world. So it's a lot of people. There are people who have this erroneous belief that the way to deal with this virus is to just make everybody get it and you build up immunity. There's a couple things that are wrong with that way of thinking. First of all, we don't know a whole lot about this virus. We are still in a bit of a learning phase. This virus is not like any other virus that we have had. And so how it is transmitted, how it impacts, the lung system. There's an article that I was reading earlier this morning into the wee hours of the morning about how this infection, it's like a dual whammy with coronavirus, because what it's actually doing is it's what they're calling the COVID pneumonia that is absolutely critical with this. I'm going to read something here from the New York Times that looks at how the pneumonia component of this is like none other that they've ever seen. They've never seen a virus that has such a high number of pneumonia patients. And eventually it's the complications from that end up taking the lives of people from COVID-19. So I want us to talk about some of this stuff, because when I hear people saying stuff like the only way to build up an immunity to this is for you to catch it, that simply doesn't make any good logical sense. This isn't the cold, and that is why there's some real dangers with people having that process and having that way of thinking, because at the end of the day, if you think like that, you're more likely to do things that will put both yourself at risk and other people at risk as well. So a big shout out to all of you who are tuned in. We've got almost 200 persons tuned in between YouTube and Facebook. So Dawn says, good evening. We got Sai, Trisha, Jessica, Cameron. A lot of you are tuned in both morning and evening, so we appreciate the love. Dean Shalat, thank you so much for tuning as well. Jake says that the reason why the press conferences are going so long is because a number of stupid questions are being asked over and over again. Cameron says, even when there's new information, they still ask the same questions. Atlas, don't forget, I have a gift certificate for you. So at some point, I need to get that to you. Evelyn, Nancy, we can talk a little bit about the Nicaragua situation again, because without their countries opening their borders, I don't really know how that's going to work. And I want to talk about logistically how that happened. How was it that we were putting on flights with people to go to Nicaragua, and the government does not seem to have been on board with that, because for them to turn around and close their borders means that what, we didn't actually speak to them? I'm a little confused about the deployment, sorry, of how this was going to happen. So it does appear that there was some lack of communication on our part with the officials in Nicaragua. And I guess they heard that they were coming. They were like, oops, we're not going to let them in. So it's kind of crazy that that might have happened. And based on what I'm understanding, that's exactly what happened. And so that's a direct failure on our part. And we can't sugarcoat that. And we can't pretend that this isn't partially our fault. We got to take accountability for when we screw up, even in small measure, because now that means that there's over 100 people that are here from Nicaragua who are unemployed, who are packed and ready to go, who gave up their apartments, gave up their leases, and were more than prepared to leave. And they're now stuck because someone didn't think that it might have been prudent, especially knowing how crazy the Nicaraguan government is, that it may have been prudent to actually make sure that this went through official channels and not just saying, okay, we're going to put on a flight and put you on a plane and send you back. Maybe there's some countries that we can do that with, but at the end of the day, Nicaragua shouldn't have been one of those countries, because we kind of know how they are, right? So Tamika says that's a good read about the stats in the different countries. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Cameron says we're all experts now. And this is the thing, in the day and age that we live in, where we can read a little bit of information, or we can see a video for some crackpot guy that we think in our head makes sense. And we're like, oh yeah, well, that makes total sense, you know, blah, blah, blah. And we're going to go with it. There's some of us who love a conspiracy theory. We're not into reading to truly educate ourselves. We just want to read something that you know, feeds into what we already believe. And if something challenges our way of thinking, we're simply not going to accept it. And I don't know what Morna means. Sandy, all what you're speaking showing up on screen. I'm not sure what that means. Is it closed caption? Because that has been on for a minute now. So yeah, closed caption is great, because we do have some persons who tune into the program who are hearing impaired. And so closed caption is extremely useful for those individuals. Yeah, so I mean, it's one of those things where everybody wants to be an expert. Listen, I'm no expert. What I'm an expert at is reading, gathering information, and sharing what I gather from the sources that I gather it from. And that's why I think it's very, very important that people be prepared to not just listen to me, but get the information for themselves so that they can be properly informed about what is going on. So yes, you know, stay educated, but be very, very cautious of the sources that you are getting your information from, because the source makes the world of difference. So many of you may have seen this video of this guy that's been circulating on YouTube. He has a YouTube channel, and he has been essentially, I've gotten it tons of times from different people. He has been talking about this theory of where he thinks the coronavirus actually came from, and you know how they deployed it. And this is a big conspiracy theory with Bill Gates and all these other people. And it's an interesting theory, but when you start to dig a little bit deeper, there are some serious credibility issues, number one, with him, and number two, with what he's actually saying. So everybody loves a conspiracy theory. We want to think that Bill Gates has time to create some virus and then try to create a antidote for that, call a vaccine. And the whole idea is to get us all vaccinated with this Bill Gates thing so he can control us. I mean, I don't really know what the end game of that would be. But, there's a lot of people who are anti-vaccination, and they're going to refuse to, even when a vaccine is available, they will refuse to get vaccinated because they are of the belief that this is some big conspiracy theory, and they will continue to put all of our lives at risk. And I'm not saying that, the first vaccine that comes out is even going to be 100% effective. It may only give, the population 50% immunity for what's going on here. But at the end of the day, 50% is better than 0%. And this virus right now is killing a lot of people. And so we will have some tough decisions to make, even in terms of when a vaccine is eventually rolled out. But the thing with a vaccine, there's certain countries that I do not trust with vaccines at all. Everyone is always on top of Cuba saying, oh yeah, they're going to be the first ones to get a vaccine. And I'm not saying that Cuba has some of, because most of their people are extremely educated. That's one thing that the Cuban government has done very well over the years. So everybody in Cuba is a doctor. But just because you're a doctor, once again, does not mean that you are an expert. And it certainly doesn't mean that you're an epidemiologist and that you even understand vaccines and that you're going to be the very first ones to get a cure. Listen, if Cuba are the first ones to get a cure and they do a great job with it, then that's fantastic. I think we would all want to hear that. But at the end of the day, if it's the Europeans, the Americans, whoever, the race is on to get a vaccine right now, it has to go through clinical trials. So this is where it's good common sense to make sure that people have the relevant information available, right? So that when it goes through clinical trials, we can see precisely how effective or not that vaccine actually is. So Fitzroy wants to know the WhatsApp number. I've got it scrolling there on the screen, Fitzroy. So just grab that and you can certainly message us. Wana Lucy says, good job, Sandy. Thank you so much, honey. As quick as the virus evolves, so were our solutions. And this is the other thing that is of particular interest about this vaccine. Okay, just getting some news that someone else has passed away. So the other thing about this particular virus is it is going through what appears to be several mutation stages. So people, and this again goes against what people are thinking about, oh yeah, just catch it once and you're fine, you'll be immune to it. Not really, because again, we don't know a whole lot about this particular viruses yet. But what we do know is already it is starting to mutate. And so there are people who have had it, that it's very possible that they could be reinfected again. And so they are actually doing some research at the moment and looking at exactly how that happened. And, was there some error with the initial testing? And there's lots of possibilities that they are exploring to come up with a logical explanation on that. So I will keep you guys updated as I hear more. Dimitri, good evening. Cameron, what deal we made with I don't know who you're talking about. I don't know who is. Gadiel says our phone Digicel having bandwidth issues that they aren't making the public aware of. Just wondering, the internet has been garbage. Well, I'm not surprised at that. The internet was garbage before this, and now everyone is working from home. People are obviously, really putting the internet to good use in terms of whatever they're paying for. They're trying to utilize that as much as possible. And so, yes, it's at 100% capacity, I'm pretty sure. We've not heard a single word from Offreg which the ICTA is part of during this whole situation. Not a single word. We don't know that they are monitoring the bandwidth usage in this country now that 90% of the island is home and working from home. It's been radio silence. So I would love to be able to answer that for you. But the simple answer is I do not know, because no one has, no one has said anything. So what can I tell you? Jackie, I think that's how you pronounce it, makes a good question. We still don't have an HIV vaccine. Don't hold your breath for a vaccine. AIDS has been around a really long time, and they have been working extremely hard at this. I don't know who Cher is telling she have to call him back because she's watching CMR right now. Can't talk. So yeah, I mean, it is the best possible scenario is a vaccine in 12 to 18 months. That's the development, partial testing, going through all those checks to make sure that it isn't going to kill us, kind of thing, human testing, all of that, possibly 12 to 18 months. The Chinese are claiming that they are going to get a vaccine first, and that they've been studying the coronavirus for a long time. Are we going to trust the Chinese? Probably not. The chances are that this virus, I don't think it was necessarily man-made in the sense that it's a complete fabrication, right? But what I do think has probably happened is the Chinese were experimenting with bats in that Wuhan lab, because there is an infectious disease lab in Wuhan, China, right where the epicenter of this thing all began, as we remember, in late December. It was probably mid-December, because the Chinese government was purposely killing, not literally killing people, but killing information. So the flow of information, when their physicians were saying, hey, we're noticing a new something that's going on here that we've never seen before, medical officials need to pay attention to this. They were subverting that information, keeping that underground, and not allowing it to come to the forefront. And so it is estimated that we lost at least 3 weeks because of the Chinese government and their particular tactics of making sure that people do not have information available, because they've been the source of a SARS outbreak before. So they didn't want to be the source of another outbreak, because it impacts them in a real way. Who wants a Chinese product right now? Everybody is getting down on China around the world. People are like, oh, keep the Chinese in one corner. Their lives are at risk outside of China. Some of their factories are being burnt to the ground. All sorts of things are going on. So right now, the nationality of choice is definitely not to be Chinese. And there has been this Chinese backlash from when the world became aware of the fact that, that this has come out of Wuhan, China. So there are some real concerns about that. And as a result, even if the Chinese came up with a vaccine, not a whole lot of people are going to be jumping on that. In fact, there are some testing kits. I want to see if I can find this, that the UK purchased from China. Remember I told you guys a couple weeks ago that they were working on this whole new rapid testing kit? And so the idea was that you could purchase these kits and do your own self-testing. Let me just find this. Because what has happened is, of course, the UK was very much on top of this. They wanted, this was like going to be a game changer for them. And they were all like, yes, 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 yes. The Chinese were like, oh, we got it together, blah, blah, blah. But what ended up happening is the UK paid $20 million for these kits, and it has turned out to be a big sham. So, the Chinese have very different ways of doing things. Their quality control measures are not always the best in the world. So I'm telling you straight up, if a vaccine comes out of China, that is not to be trusted ever. So let me give you guys the lowdown in this story. This is April the 16th, and this is some of the stuff that nobody's talking about, but this is completely legit and verified information, right? So those of you who like to peddle in fake news, you don't have to peddle in fake news. There's a lot of real news out there that is salacious enough, mall road worthy, and salacious enough to keep you entertained for years to come. So listen to this. 2 Chinese companies are offering a risky proposition. 2 million home test kits said to detect antibodies for the coronavirus for at least $20 million. Take it or leave it. The UK government decided that they were going to take it. The asking price was high, the technology was unproven, and the money had to be paid up front. And the buyer would be required to pick up the crate loads of test kits from a facility in China. Yet, despite all those red flags, and those are some serious red flags, unproven, money up front, you're responsible for picking it up, this whole 9 yards, the British officials, they took the bait. And they have decided to purchase these testing kits, which they claim would be available in pharmacies in as little as 2 weeks. Because the UK, much like the Americans, have done a piss poor job at managing the COVID-19 outbreak in their country. They've not done anywhere near the amount of testing that is required and that should be done. So on the one hand, there is this thinking that people should. Someone said to me today, "Why aren't we allowing certain workers to go back to work, like NRA and this and that?" I'm like, let us try to understand what works, right? Read, people. It is in your best interest to educate yourselves. What has worked for jurisdictions such as South Korea, Taiwan, and a few other places? I'm not sure, is it Taiwan? I may have that country wrong, but definitely South Korea. What has worked for them is testing a vast majority of their population. We talked about a month ago drive-through testing in South Korea. I even shared that on their Instagram and Facebook pages, how well that has worked for them. They've had testing stations to make sure they get everyone in the population, as many as they can, and they have a very high percentage of testing. And that testing has allowed them to drive policy decisions and to catch areas of outbreak very, very quickly that they needed to address. This is when we say knowledge is power. Saber es poder. This is why knowledge is power. Because with that information, knowing where you have these outbreaks, you can make decisions based on that. Listen, had Jamaica had a silver ball and they could see what was coming down the pipeline, they would have shut down those BPOs, which are the call centers, at the very start of this. 122 plus infections have come out of one BPO center, much less the others. And Jamaica has a lot of BPOs. This is why, again, testing. Because when you see an outbreak in an area, you go, wow, we need to shut down BPOs right now. Now it's a little bit too late because BPOs have been in operation all of this time. They're going to go into mandatory shutdown as of tomorrow for 14 days. That's nowhere near enough time. The prime minister in Jamaica is struggling because he's like, listen, my people are hungry. They're cussing me. They're carrying on. They don't understand that unless we get this under control, Jamaica will cripple, just like Cayman will cripple. If we allow this virus to overtake this country, and if we allow misinformation to seep into people's heads and into people's brains, we will cripple the economy. So if you're worried about money, you think you're worried about money now. We don't have enough hospital beds. We don't have enough respirators. We don't have enough funeral home capacity to handle the dead. that would be impacted by this. We don't have enough families that could deal with the broken hearts of multiple people dying in this community from COVID-19. So I have sympathy for world leaders who are trying to do the right thing by their people and putting certain measures in place where there's telling you, isolate yourselves. The one thing that we know works, we have no vaccine. We don't know when a vaccine is coming online. We don't have any of that information. But the one thing for sure that we know works is stay away from other people. Because this virus requires you as a host to continue to live. If it dies out and no one becomes an incubator or host for it, it cannot continue to spread. And that's why I'm telling people straight up, listen to me. If we get this under control in the Cayman Islands, which with our population size, and especially if we allow people to leave the jurisdiction who are unemployed and have no jobs, we have a smaller amount of people to try to control it with. It's doable for us more than anywhere in the world because we are a very small country. However, people saying, oh, in a couple months, we're going to be opening our airports. Say what? No. The US will not be getting this under control anytime soon. Europe will not be getting this under control anytime soon. The UK, et cetera, et cetera. No. The vast majority of cases, even in Jamaica, a lot of those are imported cases. So the quicker you shut down and isolate your borders, the better. Now, you can't isolate your borders from your own citizens. You've got to let them in, which means you need to have a plan, a deployment plan for quarantining them. So we saw 47 Jamaican deportees from the United States arriving today. They took them straight from the plane into buses. They were organized, took them to whatever quarantine facility that they're going to be staying at, and they will be checked twice per day, checking temperatures, checking, all this stuff to see if they need to get those persons medical assistance. They now have 6 persons dead in Jamaica. Yesterday was a UE professor. He was a professor of chemistry, and he has now passed away. So he was victim number 6. Their death toll will continue to rise. As the death toll continues to rise, the impact will be severe on all countries. And that's what we're trying to avoid here in the Cayman Islands. So back to this UK story. So the UK government, the UK officials, decided to pay this money to these Chinese companies. And even the prime minister said, oh, it's going to be as simple as a pregnancy test. It has the potential to be a total game changer. Sounds wonderful theoretically, but here's the problem. The tests don't work. So now you paid $20 million for tests that don't work. Why? Because you had to prepay. You see how slick these Chinese companies are? Demanding that you prepay, demanding that you collect, demanding that you do this. What about giving us a batch of tests for free, even 100, that we could deploy, test and check out, and then verify those results from the standard tests that we have available, have our scientists check it out, and then we decide if we want to purchase. Oh, no, it was like, no. This rush. We've got this great test. You got to get it right now. You know how it is, folks. Anytime you feel a high-pressured sales pitch coming on or somebody trying to force you to buy something, you better beware because something is wrong. They're trying to close the deal before you're able to open up your eyes. So Oxford University did some tests and they found them to be, did some testing on those kits, and they found them to be insufficiently accurate. This was the lab at Oxford University. So now 500,000 of the tests are collecting dust and storage because that's what they took delivery of. Another 1.5 million were bought at a similar price from another source, and they're going to go unused. And now the British officials are talking about they're trying to get some of their money back. Well, they don't know the Chinese because they ain't getting none of that back. And these are the poor decisions that sometimes are being made by governments around the world. And this is, again, why we need to keep an eye on our governments at all time. I don't have any issues with watching them like a hawk. You can be supportive and you can still watch them like a hawk. So this professor of the Imperial College of London said that they might perhaps have slightly jumped the gun. There's a huge pressure on politicians to come out and say things that are positive. And that's why I'm going to take my hat off to the premier right now. He's not saying what the people want to hear, which is, oh, yes, we're going to get back to normal soon. We're going to open businesses. He's saying we need to make sure that this thing is properly suppressed and that there's no wide community transmission. And after we have determined those things, and the only way you can determine those things is by testing, which was something else that we were saying a long time ago. Finally, the chief medical officer said it about 2 weeks ago. Testing. That's the way to go. That's how you can know whether you're going to have a handle on this situation or not. And until then, to be quite frank and honest, you can't make any wise policy decisions. So, there's a possibility that we can have testing based on antibodies formed in response to the virus, but we're not there yet. That will be determined at a later date. So some people, as it spreads, will build up some level of an immunity. But, again, Debbie, I know Debbie was saying this morning, oh yeah, people build up immunity. Listen, that's not how this is going to work. If you have a slight immunity, that doesn't mean that you can't get it again. How many of us, every single flu season, get the regular influenza flu? Or every single cold, we pick up a cold? You have built up, and this is why comparing this particular coronavirus to the cold or flu is a very dangerous proposition and will cost you your life if you can continue to think that way. Celebrity doctors, Dr. Oz, Dr. What's the other one called? Dr. Drew and Dr. What's the other guy called there? Dr. Phil. They were all out there at the initial stages of this. And I saw Dr. Drew myself on TV saying, oh, this isn't that bad. You guys are blowing this out of proportion. Governments need to calm down. People need to calm down. Now, those celebrity physicians is what I call them, are eating their words, and they're being made to look like idiots because they were feeding into this narrative that this is just like the regular flu. In fact, what Dr. Drew said is that the regular flu, influenza A, kills more people than the coronavirus. So this was not a big deal, and we don't need to worry about it, and people are panicking for no reason. It turns out he was absolutely wrong. This coronavirus, this COVID-19 disease is killing way more people exponentially than the average flu. The problem is in the early stages when the numbers were still not even being properly tabulated or collated, because there are people dying that they were not even associating in the United States of America with COVID-19, but it turns out that's actually what they died of, complications from COVID-19. Those numbers were not going through this database of, okay, this is how many people have actually died. That's why I keep telling you, when we read the figures, they're on the lower end of what's going on. Because there are people in January and February who were infected and who died and were not counted. The other day, they added 3,700 people in one day to the infection list because previously they hadn't even realized that those people had it. And they were like, obviously they had it, just bulk add them in to our figures. And there are other countries who are blatantly lying about their figures as well. So there is a huge difference between saying build up an immunity to the common cold. We all know as parents, we send our kids to school. One of the first things the doctor said to me when I was like, okay, the baby's always catching a cold. She's like, listen, this is how this works. You either let her catch it and build up her immunity, because the only way to deal with certain types of viruses is to build up an immunity. You let her get it now as a baby, or when she's 5 years old and goes to public school. Because if you keep her home for the next 5 years, she's going to be a little bit in isolation, like what we're doing now. She's going to be in a bit of an incubation situation. She won't be exposed to a whole lot of people necessarily, a whole lot of other kids, but you're only delaying her exposure. And by delaying her exposure, her body can't build up these antibodies to the common cold and to, the flu and stuff like that. This particular flu isn't quite like that because we don't know. It is completely new in the human population. And that's why they're saying that it jumped from bats. Now, whether the source of the bats were people eating it in a market or the Wuhan infectious disease lab where they were doing testing on bats and it accidentally jumped from the bats into their lab operators and then out into the facility, nobody knows that portion of the story yet. Those are two theories that are both extremely viable at this particular time. So it is entirely possible that it did come from the lab, but not come from the lab, as a lot of conspiracy theorists want you to believe, that they purposely let this go. Rest assured, nobody will hurt more because of this coronavirus than the Chinese. Their economy has tanked. They have lost a lot more lives that they're letting on. Nobody with sense releases a virus like this as let's just experiment on the human population and see what happens. So we don't know, because it's new, how much of an immunity people would build up, or if they will build up an immunity at all. There may be people who get this virus, they recover because of the care that they get as a result of it, and they still have zero immunity. So they will get it again, and it could kill them the second time around. There has been an interesting thing about this virus that, again, is extremely interesting, but a lot of children appear to have a greater than usual immunity. It doesn't mean they're not going to get it. It doesn't mean that they're not going to die from it, because we see a 2-year-old in Jamaica is their youngest person so far to be infected by it. We've seen 6-year-old babies, newborn babies now, because the mother had it, are being born with this, and some of them are dying. But it seems like younger children, 10 and younger, have some sort of protection against it, and they haven't quite identified why that is. But the logical flow of information could be that because they are more recently immunized, because of all of the immunization that we do as children, that something in the immunization that we're doing is offering them some level of protection. Again, it's not a whole lot, and it's a noticeable difference as compared to the rest of the population. And there's a lot more that has to be learned about this sort of situation. So, the British took a gamble on this antibody test. Unfortunately, they lost $20 million. You know how much $20 million times 2? That's $40 million. How much that could have purchased of like the PPE equipment that they need, respirators, beds. I mean, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. And I don't think they're getting any of it back. Germany. So even before this so-called antibody test, Germany had been doing large-scale testing of the virus. They're conducting as many as, they started out doing 50,000 diagnostic tests a day to help trace and isolate the cases. And again, that's what works. Now they're up to 120,000 per day. Let's compare that to Britain. They're still conducting less than 20,000 diagnostic tests a day. They claim that they had a previous target of 25,000 a day by mid-April. We're in April 21st, and they have not reached that. Now they're claiming their new goal is to reach 100,000 a day by the end of the month. Is that going to be possible when they're only doing 20,000 right now and they're already behind? Time will tell. We'll update you in a couple weeks' time. So they claim everybody's got an excuse. Every government's got an excuse for what's going on. British officials are saying that they started out late because they lack private testing companies like what they have in Germany and the US, who are capable of manufacturing and performing tests by the tens of thousands. So they're basically saying that their government-funded NHS system, or whatever they call it, is lacking in more ways than one. So the lack of private medical and testing facilities has been to their own detriment. I'm sure that's a contributing factor. The other thing is, a lot of world leaders have just not been on top of it. Here's what the Chinese do again, these high pressure tactics. So these medical companies in China, they talk about demanding a yes or no decision from buyers with full payment up front in as little as 24 hours. No one should be able to come to you and say, oh, you need to make a decision in 24 hours. Give me $20 million right now. I would be like, what? No way. So no ability to cross-check and so on. So I'm going to link this story. It's a very lengthy story, but I think it is worth reading. I'll put it in the link here for the show. You guys need to read it for yourselves. I'm just giving you the snippet of it. This is a good source of information, and we need to understand how jumping the gun can be very, very dangerous and detrimental. The other area of concern is the fact that Cayman has acquired a lot of test kits, and we are of the opinion that we have so many that we can now sell to the rest of the Caribbean. I'm not saying not to help out and sell some, but I think we need to be cautious. What I would do first, test your entire population. Then you see what you have left over. Because remember, if we have 100,000 kits and we have 60,000 people on this island, well, we have to do things like double testing of persons. Because remember, you go into isolation, you're going to be tested at the end of your 14 days. They wait for results, and then you're tested again because they want to make sure that those tests are accurate. So you could be using 2 to 4 components of the test kit, which is like the swab and all this other stuff. I'm going to break that down a little bit more with you guys in terms of how that works. So you could be using all these different components on one person, and there goes your 100,000 that you have. So yes, we want to help out our regional brothers and sisters. Everybody's in favor of that. But let us not do so at the detriment of ourselves, right? We're all in the same boat together up to a certain point. So Keisha, thank you. Kathy, Gadiel, Leroy. Here's a short fact of did you know? Did you know that researchers are full of shit? Trust in God. Well, Cindy, God gave us the technology. God gave us the knowledge and information that we have in this day and age to cure a lot of things that were not curable before, that are now curable because of technology. Vaccines have saved millions of lives. And those people who tell you all kind of foolishness about vaccines have not done their research. They believe anything that they read. The countless millions of people that have been saved because of against smallpox and polio and all these other diseases that if vaccines did not exist, would not even be here to be anti-vaxxers. They need to do their research. And so, they want to believe this narrative that vaccines will harm you and they'll do this. Okay, just stick a pin in it. Say for 1 minute that was true and vaccine caused autism, which isn't true. But just say for a minute that it was. What would the trade-off be? A small portion of the population who's autistic versus millions of people dying from uncontrollable diseases like smallpox and polio and all these other diseases. You know what I'm saying? Autism doesn't even kill you. Depending on where you are in the autism spectrum, you could be a highly functional individual. But the truth of the matter is the whole narrative of vaccines with autism came from one physician. And this is where I want you guys to be careful because you buy into something. And in this day and age where everybody has access to YouTube, everyone thinks that they're an expert, everybody's jumping on these things, misinformation can spread like wildfire. There's a guy who, I'll look up his information and share it with you guys later on. He was a physician, he was a researcher. And he claims to have found this correlation, not cause and effect, but a correlation between people who were autistic and people who were vaccinated, which, by the way, the vast majority of the world is vaccinated. So if there was a real correlation, a real cause and effect, you'd have way more people with autism than not. But despite that, he claims to have done research and had an association. This guy puts out this research paper. A lot of people started to, oh yeah, this guy's right. Look at this correlation. And yeah, vaccines cause autism, blah, blah, blah. They're full of mercury, this, that, and the next thing. Turns out he fabricated the information, the data in his research. He flat out lied and put this information out there. And this is what people do to get attention for themselves, to get research funding, or to even get views on YouTube, because YouTube pays you based on the number of views that you have. Folks, the time goes by so quickly. We're already out of time for this evening. It's only a 1 hour show. We got 2 hours in the morning to play with. This latest guy, his name is Rashid Buttar. I'm going to talk about him in the morning. He's an American orthopedic physician. He's not an epidemiologist. He's not a virologist. He doesn't specialize in any of this, but he now claims to have all of the information on the coronavirus. And he's an expert, and he's put out this video out there. It's a 4-part series about time to wake up. And a lot of you have been buying into this. Trust me when I tell you this guy is a fluke. An orthopedic surgeon who decides he's going to treat cancer patients with hydrogen peroxide. And that is why he's no longer a physician. And he's out there trying to get your views and your votes on his shows that he has so that he can make a paycheck, because he's not a physician. Wake up, folks. You got to be prepared to educate yourselves. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Please tune in the morning, because I will continue this conversation. We're going to talk about the military presence that's coming here to the Cayman Islands. What's the purpose of them coming? Why are they coming? There was a press release that came out today. So that will be one of the things that we will discuss definitely in the morning. And I've put the link here for the New York Times story on the antibody test that the UK spent 20 plus millions, I think more like $40 million on. Post office will not be opening anytime soon. And we just want to make sure that we are educating ourselves and we're putting out as much information as possible. Kathy's talking about Trump and some of the misinformation that he's been putting out there. Trump is woefully out of his league, and his best bet, if he had any sense, would be to keep his mouth shut and to let the professionals run the show. But of course, he wants to be in the limelight, so he's not doing that. Make sure you tune in the morning as well, because Krista is going to be joining us for her first segment here on Cayman Mall Road with Eating Clean. We're going to find out more about her business and her food delivery service and how Krista lost an immense amount of weight by just eating clean. And so we're going to be very, very happy to have Krista on the show with us tomorrow morning. So we got a show packed full of information. So please, folks, make sure that you tune in. You will definitely enjoy it. We're going to schedule the link here shortly, so it should pop up on Facebook and YouTube, where you can just click that you're interested in viewing the show, and then it comes up for you. Folks, have a wonderful evening. Thank you again so much for tuning into the show tonight. We got lots of information for you. We're bringing it to you straight on the cold, hard truth, the hard, cold truth, and the cold, hard truth. Any way you slice it, it's the same thing right here on Cayman Mall Road. Be safe, folks, and we'll see you in the morning.
Cayman's restaurants have always been there for you. A place to get together with friends, to celebrate, to take a first date, or grab a meal between rugby and piano practice. And even though the tables are empty, some kitchens are still full, ready to feed you and your family while keeping you safe and making your meals as delicious as ever. They were there for you, now we can be there for them. While doors might be closed, kitchens are open for delivery. Let's eat.
You don't know who I am. I know all about you. I've come to talk to you tonight about the things I've seen you do. I've come to set the record straight. I've come to shine the light on you. Let me introduce myself.